Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Chen Shu. I'm a board member of the Great Neck Chinese Association, a non-for-profit organization that has been serving the Great Neck, Long Island community and beyond for the past 25 years. GNCA currently represents more than 1,000 Chinese American families locally. As we know, Great Neck is a large family-oriented neighborhood with a diverse Asian American presence. The Great Neck Chinese Association has been tirelessly promoting Chinese culture, heritage, education, language, and the arts. We're also the first school district to officialize the Chinese New Year holiday in Long Island. Today's webinar is part of the GNCA 2021 Culture and Education Series. We're honored to co-host this evening with the North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center. We're also pleased to have Senator Anna Kaplan from the 7th District, Christine Liu, Vice Chair of the Nassau Asian American Advisory Council, Andrew Malikoff, and Regina Barros Rivera from the North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center. As the preeminent non-for-profit children's mental health agency on Long Island, North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center is dedicated to restoring and strengthening the emotional well-being of children from birth to age 24 and their families. The Guidance Center helps children and families address issues such as depression and anxiety, developmental delays, bullying, teen pregnancy, sexual abuse, and more. For more than 65 years, the Guidance Center has been a place of hope and healing, providing innovative and compassionate treatment to all who enter their doors. So with further ado, let's welcome Mr. Andrew Malikoff from the Guidance Center to kick off tonight's discussion. Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, Shenzhen. That was a very nice introduction, and you did a big part of my job, so I don't really have to say too much more about the Guidance Center, that's for sure. But we are, a local community-based agency, and we were started by a grassroots group of parents, just like all you folks out there, and I want to welcome all of you who are part of this evening's event, who are listening, watching. Hopefully we'll put some questions into the chat box a little bit later on. And so this is really, it's all about community. And we've been doing a series, Guidance Center Perspectives on Pandemic 2020. So this is also, part of that series, as well as the cultural educational event that Shenzhen spoke to. So I want to thank the Great Neck Chinese American Association and Senator Kaplan and her office for working together with us on this. And the focus is going to be on anti-Asian bias, what parents need to know. And so we're going to, and I should mention, Shenzhen already introduced everyone, but I'll just say I'm in the upper right-hand corner. Shenzhen's below me. Next to her is Regina Barros Rivera, who's the Associate Executive Director of North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center. And of course, you all know Senator Anna Kaplan, who is just to my left as you look at the screen. And Christine Liu will be joining us. And I should mention, COVID-19 is hard enough for people to deal with, and then to have to deal with scapegoating that's manifest in slurs and even sometimes physical harassment is really too much to bear. And I wonder sometimes if the people that antagonize others really recognize them as real people or as others who are not human in some kind of a way. And we have to really take a close look at that tonight. Tomorrow is the 19th anniversary of the 9/11 attack on America, on World Trade Center in Pennsylvania, the Pentagon. Almost 3,000 people died. And so I wanted to acknowledge that. But, what I also want to say is that it brings me back to that time when very similar things to what we're going to be discussing and what parents and kids were struggling with then. And after the attacks, it didn't take too much time before, we all seemed to be numb, and then we were together with that great traumatic tragedy. And then all of a sudden, there was a group of people in the United States that were being attacked, kids that were being harassed, called names, physically pushed around. And these were kids who were Muslim. And I remember we had an event, and there is Christine Liu. So I just want to let Christine know, she had a little trouble getting in, that Chen Zhen mentioned you before and introduced you. And she's Christine's the vice chair of the Nassau Asian American Advisory Council. And as I was saying, on the 19th anniversary of 9/11, that soon thereafter, there were kids and adults who were Muslim who were being attacked much in the same way. People that did nothing, were innocent, but were being targeted and stereotyped. And we had an event similar to this, except it was a face-to-face event, and it related to some of the same kinds of issues. And I distinctly remember there was a young guy at the event that we had. He was probably about 12 or 13 years old. And it was an intergenerational event. So we had adults and kids there. And this was a boy from Westbury, and his name was Mohammed. And he attended this intergenerational cultural awareness forum that we had at our headquarters. And after sitting quietly for almost a half hour, he spoke up. And I remember very distinctly, with a trembling voice, he revealed that there were kids in his school and on the street who taunted him. They called him terrorist because his name was Mohammed, an Arabic name that means praiseworthy. But instead of feeling proud, Mohammed felt more like an outcast. But by the end of that community event, when he got so much validation and affirmation for speaking out about his plight, he was a different kid after that point. He felt proud, which we have to make sure our kids feel, with his head held high. And that sense of community went a long way for him. Yeah. I should also mention that in a week from now, I and people of my background celebrate the Jewish High Holy Days. And it was about 2 or 3 years ago that I got a call from my wife, who was in a supermarket. And I mentioned the supermarket because in some of the notes that we received from some of the parents and community members out there, we noticed that supermarkets and the Long Island Railroad and some other public kinds of places are places where people experience a number of these kinds of incidents. So she was shopping, and one of the things we do on the High Holy Days is we remember those who we lost. And my wife and I had lost all 4 of our parents. And one of the things that she was buying, it's called a Yortzeit candle. Here's what it looks like. It's a memorial candle that we light on the holiday Yom Kippur, which is in a couple weeks, Yom Kippur. And there was a guy, a man, a big man, as she told me on the phone, that was standing in line behind her. And he was grumbling under his breath, and she didn't know what his problem was, but she was just checking out. And he saw her put these candles on the conveyor belt. And he said to her, the ovens are still open. The ovens, meaning the ovens in the concentration camp after people were gassed and then were to be incinerated. And she called me and we talked about it. And what that story and the story of Mohammed have in common, and I think probably in common with many of the stories that you folks out there have experienced, is those are what I call frozen moments. They're moments that stick with you for the rest of your life. You remember them forever. I remember every time that I was taunted for whatever my background was. And sadly, in every pandemic, a scapegoat is needed to blame. And fear can be easily exploited during times of high anxiety and uncertainty. And there's xenophobia, the irrational fear of people perceived to be foreign. So if you've been a target, it's something that you never forget. But it is something that when you share with others as a part of a community is the beginning to making a difference in your life. So the first person I would like to introduce to speak this evening is Senator Anna Kaplan.
Thank you, Andrew. I want to start by thanking everyone responsible for putting this very important event together tonight. Andrew Malakoff and Regina Barros Rivera from North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center, Christine Liu and Chen Zhan from Nassau Asian American Advisory Council and from the GNCA. It really hurts me, and it is really unfortunate that we have to come together to do this. But one good thing out of this is that it brings a lot of information about the great work North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center does, and that it's there to help the families who are having difficulties and giving them guidance as to what to do while they're going through this. As I said, it is disheartening to get together because of this, but it is really important that we do. Because the crisis we find ourselves in has brought out the best and the worst in people. And the terrible reality is that there has been a significant escalation of harassment and violence against the Asian American community. It has been fueled by anti-Asian bias and xenophobia. None of these problems are new. But the challenges of this crisis have made all problems more severe. And it's going to take all of us working together to address them. And it's going to take all of us working together to make sure our kids are protected. Earlier this year, as we were seeing a big rise in hate crimes and violence, I took action in the state Senate. I introduced a package of bills to combat the rising tide of hateful fueled violence through education, awareness, and stronger hate crimes statutes. Two of the bills I wrote to create age-appropriate curriculum in schools, helping to educate students and community about what discrimination and bias looks like in the real world, and empowering them with tools and strategies to stop it from happening. The third bill I wrote creates a statewide campaign promoting acceptance, inclusion, tolerance, and understanding of diversity. The campaign will incorporate all forms of media to get out the message. And the fourth bill from the package amends the criminal procedure law to strengthen our hate crime statute by allowing previous statements to be admitted as evidence to show a defendant intentionally committed a hate crime based on their personal bias. In addition to these legislations, I was proud to help pass a new law to prosecute mass acts of hate-fueled violence as domestic terrorism, like what we all saw in the tragic anti-Semitic attack in Muncie last year. I believe once enacted, my bills will help to address the problems we are seeing. But until then, we all bear a responsibility to educate our kids about right and wrong, to teach them good values about acceptance and inclusion. And we all must speak out forcefully when we see hate, bias, and xenophobia in our community. Because an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Hate has no place here. And what we've been seeing is completely unacceptable. And it's got to end. And I want everyone who has suffered because of it to know that this entire community stands with them. And we won't stop working till this stops. And also in the meantime, I want everyone to know that I'm here to help with whatever you're going through. If you're experiencing any trouble in our community, please don't hesitate for a second to call me. You can reach me in my local office at 516-746-5924, or you can email me at kaplan@nysenate.gov. I'm always here for you, no matter what. And I'm always happy to hear and see what I could do to help you out. Again, thank you for having me for this very important webinar. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much for your remarks, Senator Kaplan. And I think it's important to mention that we're looking at this issue from a variety of concentric circles this evening. And so we just got a very good look at some of what the activity is on the state level. And we're going to, in a moment, with Christine Liu, look at the local level. And then Regina is going to bring us right down to the family and the individual. So with that, Christine Liu, you're up next.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everybody. First, I would like to thank the Great Neck Chinese Association and the North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center for having the foresight to organize and host this important webinar. It is so timely and so relevant, so thank you. And thank you, Senator Anna Kaplan, for your devotion and dedication to the Asian community in Nassau. Yes, it's been very hard grappling with the Asian hate and bias because of the coronavirus, mainly. Our emotions are all over the place, right? It ranges from full-on anger to confusion with our leaders and fear for our kids, as well as disappointment in people and their racist behavior. But I'm so glad today that we have experts here to help guide our youth and our parents to help us process all of this. So thank you. So what do we do when we encounter the hate, the blame, the bias, the racial slurs, when people spit on us, when people tell us to go back to our country, go back to where this virus came from, or even worse, where our kids are getting bullied, they're getting shunned and shamed because of this virus. We just heard of an incident this week in Great Neck, and it was very sad and terrifying for our kids. So the main takeaway that I would like everybody to recognize, and it's paramount for everybody to understand, is that we have to report every single instance of bias, no matter how big, no matter how small, all needs to be reported. Okay, I know we're Asians. Sometimes we're a little bit more passive. Maybe that's within our culture. But please know that every time we fail to report, we lose the opportunity to seek justice. And we lose the opportunity to bring awareness to our community that Asian bias and hate exists in Nassau County. And on the flip side, when we do report, that's when we inform the entire community. That's our elected officials like Senator Kaplan. That's our town supervisor. Those are our school district superintendents. That's our police department. We're informing them that Asian discrimination is alive and present in Nassau County. So let us do our job. Let us just report it, okay? That is my plea today. I also wanted to mention that when we do report, there is like just glimmers of hope. I wanted to share something from New York City Police Department. Just last month, they created an Asian hate crimes task force. Try saying that many times in my head. They created the task force to fight Asian American hate crimes based on the number of reports of hate crimes during this pandemic. There was a surge and they responded to it. And I'm so happy because just within the month of its creation, it already led to 4 arrests against Asians in New York City on these hate crimes. So if we as Asians, we can learn from this, we have to start developing the mindset of reporting if we want to see change, if we want to effectuate change. So now you may be asking, what kind of incidents are we supposed to report, Christine? Or who do we report them to? Well, first, I have to say, if you feel you're in danger, if you feel your life is being threatened in any way, please do not take it lightly and call 911 immediately. Because as we all know, dangers and threats escalate very quickly, right? So we need to call 911. And this actually is very relevant to our kids as well. The same rules apply to our kids. They all have phones these days. If they feel unsafe, they feel that they're in danger, they need to also call 911 and report that. But then there are those gray areas, right? Where you're walking on the street and somebody calls you chink, chink, go back to your country. That's the famous saying, go back to wherever you came from, right? Or you may be renting from a landlord who no longer wants to rent to you now because you're Chinese. Or your kids at school or on the playground, they're being called the corona. This is all happening around us. Andrew, or if someone can now put on the slide that I had provided, that would be great. Because here's the number and contact that I would like everyone to call, along with Senator Kaplan's office. We need to report everywhere, as many places as possible. But the Office of Asian American Affairs was created in Nassau County. And the director is Farah Mazawala, and she has a staff that speaks many languages, including Mandarin. And they are welcoming all the reports, the incidents of biases. And they will help guide you through what you need to do. So sometimes you're flustered, you don't know how to follow up in a situation. They would let you know this is a situation where you need to report it to the police. Or they can refer you to the community POP officer and they can visit you. Or they can help you contact the superintendents of schools, which they've done in the past, I know. Or they can refer you to counselors and other government agencies. So I do want to impress the importance of reporting. And this office, in fact, would be a great place to go because we need to document everything. The more reports, the more incidents that are reported, the better service Asians will be receiving in Nassau County. I should also say that if you've called 911, please also still call this office so they can document the incident. I want to commend the Asian residents that have called during this pandemic. The office did receive about 150 calls and emails during this time, about half of which, 50% of which, were discrimination specific. But Chinese residents only reported about a handful of these incidents. So the Chinese community definitely needs to improve in its reporting, for sure. I did also have the census information there. That is like a side plug, but we know 2020 is a census year. And it's so important that we all participate in the census. Just to give you an example, the reason why this Office of Asian American Affairs was created was based on the 2010 census data, which showed that Asians represented 10% of the Nassau population, which is comparable to the Black and Latino community. So legislation was put forth and passed to create this office to meet the needs of Asians in Nassau County. And I just read a Newsday report, actually it was earlier this year, that said that there's a 30% increase in Asians in the town of North Hempstead and the town of Oyster Bay. So by their calculations, if we completed the census correctly, 1 in every 5 residents in the town of North Hempstead would be an Asian American. That's 20% of that population. And in the towns of Syosset, or within Oyster Bay and Jericho, whatever, they also are about 26.9% increase in the Asian population there. So let's all do our best to, I'm plugging in the census participation here. If we do that, we will have the right data to bring us the right resources to help us in the needs that we have in the Asian community. Okay, going back to what we were talking about before. I also wanted to impress, lastly, the power of a video recording. Okay, we all know what we see on social media, and a video recording sends a powerful message, as we saw in the George Floyd tragedy. Without a video, unfortunately, sometimes in these circumstances, it's like a he said, she said, right? I said, she said this, he said that, and we don't really know what's going on. So right now I'm reminding myself and I'm training my kids. Once you're in a situation that you think is going to go awry and there is bias and hate, just take out your phone and start to record. Record from the beginning. That's paramount as well. A lot of times we stand there, deer in headlights, not knowing what to do, what to say. And by the time we think about recording, somebody is actually recording us. And there's actually been 2 instances in Nassau County. And unfortunately, they involve children, teenagers. Basically, they did not get a video recording of what precipitated the discrimination or the incident. But what actually happened was when the victim finally came to and started to defend himself, well, actually both of them were herselves, when they started to defend themselves and started to retaliate and defend with some racial slurs and some profanity, that was what was captured on the video. So it's frustrating because now it seems like the victim was almost the aggressor or had some fault in it, which was not the case. You're still the victim, but it went from a slam dunk case to something a little bit harder to prove. So I would like everybody to do your best to train your kids as well how to handle themselves in that situation and to be careful of the words they choose in that tense situation. So if you remember anything from what I'm trying to share tonight, it's to record as soon as possible and report always, because that's what's going to bring about the change. Thank you for allowing me to present, and I can be around to answer any of your questions later on. Thank you. Back to you, Andrew.
You know, Christine, you reminded me of a time when I was 10 years old and we moved from a very homogeneous community to a more heterogeneous community. And I was outside, it was snowing, and we were in a snowball fight with the neighborhood kids. And a few doors down, a mother came out because I guess I hit her son with a snowball. And she said, "Why don't you go back to Prince Street?" I was 10 years old. I didn't know what she was talking about. So I went about what I was doing. And later I went home and I said, "Mom, what is Prince Street?" And she said, "Why are you asking me that?" She says, "Oh, the lady, down a couple houses down told me to go back to Prince Street." She had her bathrobe on. It was early in the morning. She ran out the front door. And I guess she wasn't as passive as some of the folks you spoke about, Christine. And she started banging on this door. And it wasn't until, although it's a frozen moment for me, and it wasn't until years later that I said, "What was that all about?" And it turns out that Prince Street was a Jewish ghetto in Newark, New Jersey, which is where I grew up. And so, yeah, that go back where you came from, is universal for people that are stereotyped. And yes, you don't have to be aggressive and bang on someone's door in order to make a point. You can be assertive. And I think it's a lesson that our children have to learn, that yes, tell us what happened, speak up, don't be ashamed, hold your head up high for who you are, and speak out, whether it's by taking a video or reporting it to someone. So I think those lessons, really resonate, Christine, and I appreciate everything that you had to say. And, it was a pleasure for me in this whole process. I knew Senator Kaplan for a number of years, but I didn't know Chen Zhen or Christine, and I gave them a call, and we spent almost an hour each on the phone, and it gave me, a much deeper appreciation for what you folks out there, and there's now 131 of you, have experienced and are concerned about. So I'm surrounded by dynamic women, and the next one I'm going to introduce is No Shrinking Violet, and that's Regina Barros Rivera. As I said, she's the Associate Executive Director at the Guidance Center. We've known each other for 31 years. Regina is a master clinician and family therapist, and she's worked with many minority populations, people of color, and has a really, deep personal and professional insight into this. And so now our next circle is the family and the individual. So Regina, why don't you take over?
Thank you. I want to thank all of you today for allowing me to be part of this webinar. Although I am not of an Asian background, I have experienced the first generation Latina racism growing up. And to think, I thought that, all right, this was in the past. To my surprise, when I had children, I found that they had the same experience. I'm like, I thought that would go away. So I guess it's my own being naive that no, it just doesn't disappear. And I believe what we're looking at is intergenerational patterns of behavior that are that exacerbate with political and economic times. And it can be horrific at times. It kind of goes under, and other times it comes up. And people see me sometimes, they don't know really what ethnicity I am. So depending on what happens, I get all kinds of looks and racial slurs, even to this day. So I am horrified by what is happening to the Asian community, and I would like to be part of looking at making changes. For today, my role was to look at the family. And I work with predominantly, and have worked with for many years, many different ethnic groups. I've worked with the Latino community who experience this on a daily basis. And the families really struggle, particularly the parents, because they feel powerless. They don't know how to help their children. And so they come to us with the children, especially adolescents, wanting to venture out. They want to be in the world. That is their job. Their job is to figure out who they are, get a sense of their identity, get a sense of self. They need to be different from their parents, yet close and tied to the parents. So the parents get very nervous when they venture out and they want to go into the world, and the world's not a safe place, and the community they live in is not a safe place. So I kind of thought a lot about this for today, and I thought, what might I tell the families that are here today watching? I said, well, what would you do? What do I recommend that you do if your child experiences racism? It depends. It depends. If you're being attacked, hey, it's you follow the rules of what you need to do to protect yourself, safety and stability. But what happens every single day to the children is they're taking in this negativity. So what you want to do as a parent is you want to open up that conversation with your child. Invite your child in for communication. So if your child comes home and they say, such and such said this to me in the play yard, in the playground, or I had a fight and someone called me this name. As a parent, your instinct is want to defend and to give your opinion. What you need to learn to do is quiet down and just listen to them. Tell me about that. Tell me what happened. What were you thinking? What did you want to say? What didn't you say? What would you have liked to do? What you didn't do? I'm glad you didn't do that. Or, oh, I felt like crying. Talk to me about that. If the parent does not open up the conversation, what will happen is that child will shut down and they may not come back and tell you again. They may be worried that this is going to get the parent worried. It's going to upset my mother. It's going to upset my father. Maybe they're going to run out to the school and report it's going to be worse for me. So just stay still and listen. What you want to do is help them to develop a sense of confidence and ability to take care of themselves. The more they can talk openly to the parent, the more secure and stronger they will be, and they will grow up. You want them to grow up with that sense of self. You want to give them that tool to communicate, either to you or to a teacher or to a guidance counselor. You want to help them to have a voice. You want to help them to learn what the laws are. You want to help them to make the choice of when do you shut down and when not. When I was as a teenager, I remember I was walking from the train and I lived in a really tough neighborhood, and I was approached by another ethnic group. And one of them called me something, and I stayed shut. And there was about 5 of them. This was horrible for me because I remember like one of those frozen moments. And they said, do you have money? And I was like, I didn't. They looked. And then one of them turned around and smacked me. Now, I'm not the kind of person that stayed smacked, and I would fight back. In that moment, I said, I'm not fighting back. If I fight back, I'm dead. So I'm going to stay smacked. They started laughing. They walked away, and I kept walking. And my lesson for me that day was I'm never going to get off at that train station again, and I have to walk through another street. But I learned to defend myself. I was humiliated and shamed, but I saved myself because I made that decision. There's no way I could defend myself with 5. And I had to humble down and kind of walk away and figure it out. And I did a lot of that growing up. And I taught that to my kids. But I also taught my kids how to learn the law, how to defend themselves, and how to speak up. So it's very hard for a parent to stand by and hear their child come home and feeling awful. But it is your job to help them stand up and feel good about themselves. So what I recommend to parents is get involved. Carpool. As a parent, I loved carpooling. What I did, kept my mouth shut and I listened. And I remember hearing some racial slurs going on in the car, and I wanted to turn around and tell them something, and I didn't. When I got home, I took my son and I said, I want to talk to you. I heard some things going on in there, and I didn't like that. What didn't you like? Let's talk about it. And I taught him what it was that wasn't good. It was subtle, but it was there. It was racist. It was nasty. And he wasn't saying it, but he was part of it because he was listening. So I said, I didn't say anything. That's going to be the last time I don't say anything. Next time you need to do something, we're not going to have that here. Nor are we going to have that in my house. I mean, I had a lot of pretty strict rules. I was pretty lenient about certain things, but that was not something I allowed. Racial slurs in my house of any ethnic group was not allowed. Not by adults and not by the kids visiting my home. And that's what parents have to learn. Sometimes parents think, oh, it's okay. They're not talking about us. We're going to talk about them. It's all of us. So we all have to be in it together. And I really, really stress that for all the parents, because those kids are learning from you. They're learning values from you. They're learning what you're seeing on TV, making little comments. Be careful, because they are integrating that. They're taking that in, and then they're going to share that on the outside. What's unacceptable has to be unacceptable, and it has to be unacceptable across the board. At the agency, we run respite groups, so I take out groups of their multi-ethnic groups. I have a Latina girl program where it's for the Latina immigrant girls to learn to go out and have a good time. I also have other groups. I do not allow any. I drive the van. I stop the van, and I'll say, "What was that you just said? Well, what's wrong with that?" I want to stop. Let's talk. And I do that. It's a moment. It's a moment to educate. I think all of us have to do that with our kids. Now, the parent has to give the child the sense of safety and security. So you do that quietly with your child. Your role and your job is also to figure out what power do you have to make changes. And that's where I say, now you take a political step. Go to your school and talk to the guidance counselor or to the teacher and say, I hear this is going on. What can we do about it? Become part of your PTA. Become part of a community group where you talk about it. If people need to be sensitized, have workshops like this in your school. Offer it. Offer the opportunity for dialogue, what we have had. I've worked with community groups where we've worked together with the police, and the police have gotten to know the children in our community so that there's a good relationship. So you could look at, this was years ago, we did this for many years of building partnerships with the community police so that they were their friends, not their enemies. And that if you felt like something's happening, you could wave them down and they'd come over and be helpful to you, not to be afraid of them, not to see the police as your enemy. So to me, it's a lot of community work. There's community work that the parents are responsible for. And for the little ones and for your adolescents, your job is to help them grow up, help them mature, help them find themselves, help them go out, explore the world, help them to get to know other cultures. We're lucky we live in a country with all these different ethnic groups. Oh my God, how rich that is. So you learn, you go into homes, and you embrace it. That's what I would hope that could come out of where I would like to see that the majority of the people we live with are like that, and that you can bring them into your home and that we could expand that part of ourselves and our families. So that's my thoughts and my comments to you. I'm feeling hopeful. I'm so happy. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this dialogue.
Thank you, Regina. That was terrific. And I wanted to highlight one thing that you said that kind of slipped by maybe, and I want to highlight it. You talked about after that confrontation you had that you decided you weren't going to go in that area anymore. So, kids being aware of their environment, even if they're inside someplace, knowing where the exits are, things like that are really, really critical. So now we're going to go to questions. People are invited to write questions. Comments, and I have a few. Some of them were given to me before the event, so we're going to use those. But we did have one comment that came through first, which I should share. It says, this is a very helpful session, even for the parents. Thank you for sharing your experiences, tips, and pointers, and most importantly, your support. So this is about support, and this is not a one-off. That certainly North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center will be involved in any way that we can. But here's a question. How do we help kids who grow up in households where prejudice is verbalized? Kids are taught to respect parents, but sometimes the parents are the problem. You want to take that, Regina?
The question is, what do we do as a society, or what do you do if it's your child that goes into someone's home and they come back and they say they hear these things happening in somebody else's home?
I think it's a combination. The fact that many of the kids that are, carrying out these acts of discrimination are witnessing at home, either in a very blatant way or in a more passive kind of a way, even referring to the pandemic as the China virus or the Kung flu or the Wuhan virus. I mean, these are not terms that are used to be descriptive. They're used to be demeaning in some way. So there's that. And then I guess the other part of it, I don't know if that was in the question, is, what happens if kids come home and they have experienced that in another home?
Well, I think it's very, I know for us, what my husband was very active in our community. He actually would go to people's homes to find out what's going on. If there was a conflict and there were racial slurs thrown at my child, he would actually go and speak to the parents. He felt comfortable doing that. And what came out of it was educating that, the parents would act like, well, they didn't do it, but somehow they had to change. Otherwise, the child was repeating it. But I do think it has to happen in our society. I think that it has to be a place of where we educate. We have to use everything we have. We have to use the school. We have to use our religious institutions. That message has to come out in full force from everyone that it's just not acceptable. It's very hard.
And, and we have to, we're up against something, because when, and without singling any group or individual out, if political leaders, use certain kind of language, or the term they use, dog whistles, that it gives people a sense of permission, to do those things that end up trickling down in the kind of hurtful ways that we're talking about tonight. Christine.
So I do believe that it all starts at the dinner table. The conversations at the dinner table just get absorbed by the children. And the children, they see you as the parent, as the model. And so if you're speaking this way, then maybe this is the way society is, and this is the way how it should work. So what we say at the dinner table, sometimes we don't realize, even myself, I've caught myself, I read the news, I'm really upset, and sometimes I let it out at the dinner table. My husband looks at me like, well, I don't know, the kids aren't old enough for this kind of conversation yet. And then I kind of walk it back a little, right? So as parents, we have to try to keep each other in check. Husband, father, grandparents, we have to remind ourselves at the dinner table that our kids are not ready for a lot of conversations that are going on in society, and they need to be introduced in steps, right? But I think this question here is perhaps the family is blatantly prejudiced in some way, and I think then the kids will be using that same rhetoric. And so remember the reporting that I had mentioned, that is going to come out in school, right? It's not going to be kept to themselves. So when it comes out in school, those kids need to come home, who hear it, come home and tell their parents, this is what was said, right? Sometimes kids don't feel comfortable correcting their peers. Sometimes they do, and that's great. So if they feel comfortable in correcting their peers or going to their teachers and letting them know, hey, this is what's being said by this person. And then the teacher will hopefully teach a lesson. I know during this, on the onset of this pandemic, there was a lot of this kind of rhetoric going on in the playground, elementary school, middle school, on the school bus. And once parents reported it to the schools, to the teachers, they nipped it in the bud. They had a discussion right away. This virus is, all the rumors, all the stereotypes. We don't talk like this. This virus affects everybody. And the lessons, those life lessons were being taught in the classroom right away. So if your child doesn't feel comfortable, then they come home and talk to you. And then you as a parent can go and approach the school. So I feel like if this conversation is happening at home and there is prejudice, it's going to come out at school. It's going to come out on car rides, like Regina had said. And those are your opportunities to go and talk to their teachers, go and talk to the administration, the PTAs, and whatever it is. So don't worry, it's not going to stay at home. It will surface. And when it does, we need to report those things and we need to take action.
I think it was really important that you noted that when there's an opportunity to nip it in the bud, to address it when it's happening, that's really a great way not to let it kind of slide away. So the next question that we have is, if you don't have a recording, how do you report an incident?
So if you don't have a recording, you still need to report the incident. For instance, well, it depends on how serious the the circumstance was. If you were injured or whatnot, if you're calling the police, or if it was some kind of microaggression that you don't think rises to the level to warrant a report, then call Senator Kaplan's office. Call the Office of Asian American Affairs. They're there and they will listen to you. You don't need a recording. It's only helpful, to have that, but it's not necessary. It's not a requirement. They will listen to your story and they will help you and they will defend you. They'll be your advocate for you.
Could you?
Most people, when you go to an attorney's office, you don't have a recording. You just tell them your story. So it's as simple as that.
Could you say what you mean by microaggression?
Microaggression is like subtle. Usually it's like a subtle hints of bias. So maybe you didn't get a pay raise, but it's not overt. Like, oh, you didn't get a pay raise because you're Chinese, but we'll wait till next time. So there's like subtle ways of this kind of microaggression, but then there are overt microaggressions as well that were being reported. So all forms.
So we have a question, somebody who came in late wants to know, how do you help your child when they're confronted with racism, which is something we have been talking about, but I want to jump off that question with one that came prior. What nonviolent actions can I take to protect myself and my family against the offensive language and racial slurs like "go back to your country," China virus, or chink? How should an Asian person handle a situation when verbally or physically harassed? If we walk away, it reinforces the stereotypes that Asians are quiet or pushovers or can be bullied. But if we talk back, we can end up getting hurt. So I know we addressed some of these things before, but for anyone who might have come in late, do we want to add anything to that?
I recently was having a conversation with my kids exactly on this question. What do you do when they tell you, go back to your country, go back to where the virus came from? And my kids, they're not young. They're middle schoolers and one entering high school. And neither of them had a quick response. They were like, well, Mommy, what would you say? So right away, this is like a teaching moment. Yes. And my husband, he gave his response and they said, well, what about you, Mom? And I said, my daughter did say, but isn't it, nobody is from here in America. Everybody is kind of from somewhere, right, Mom? I said, oh, thank goodness you've been getting an education. So I said, unless you're Native American, I think everybody and their ancestors have come from another country. So what Mom would say is, unless you're Native American, you and your ancestors all came from another country. So I guess you better learn your history and record it though. And I don't know if that would stop the perpetrators or whatnot, or if that made them feel silly or less intelligent. But I think that's the way you can stand up for yourself in a respectable manner and not escalate the situation further.
Yeah, I think it's when I was saying the do's and don'ts, or actually more the do's, we like to look from the do's, is my reaction to that is going to be different from what my son's reaction would have been. So I would want to know from him, what was that like? Where were you? Who were they? Tell me what you were thinking, what you wanted to do. Why did you choose not to do that? If they felt humiliated, did they feel like powerless? So if they felt powerless, I might want to work with him to help him feel how powerful he was. It's for me that situation, it took me years to feel powerful, that I made a decision to not hit back, because in my community, we would hit back, we fought. So I made the decision not to fight, and I wanted to teach my son not to fight, not to use physical force, to humble yourself and to try and figure out this is not my problem. That's that person's problem. And why are they behaving like that? And let's talk about that. And that's a hard thing not to do. I mean, it's a hard thing to do for a parent, because you want to be protective of your child and you want that to stop. You really want someone to like make them stop behaving like that. And there's not, it just can't automatically happen. That's why we're having this dialogue. It really takes the whole community to help that to stop. So it's very, and like I said, we're different cultural backgrounds. So in some cultural backgrounds, maybe you may be taught to react physically, where then you have to teach not to do that, to hold back and to find your words and find other ways of resolving conflict.
Andrew, I have a question actually. It's just I see some parents here who have younger children who could be in kindergarten, who could be in elementary schools. What would you all recommend for those who have younger children? Because they probably wouldn't even be aware that they were just being discriminated. They've been taught on what bully is about, but on discrimination, that terminology, the definition of that, it's actually, I hear very little from my children. So what would y'all recommend? What should we do? How can they identify? How can we find out that's their experience at school or at the playground or at the bus, which we have recently heard many incidents happen to younger children and happen on the school buses. And you don't find out until much later. So I need advice.
How do you find out? When you say you find out later, can you give an example of that?
I suppose, again, over dinner, maybe it could be weeks later, or it could be whatever the conversation might strike. And or kids will hear similar conversation where parents will mentioning the word, something that the kids can relate. So, for the middle schoolers, for the high schoolers, yes. But for the younger ones, how do we protect them better?
So
Go ahead.
Actually, with the younger ones, I feel like there have been more reports from them. They don't really have this sense of, I'm going to keep this in. When they come home, they want, Mommy, you know what happened to me? And that's how we heard about what happened. There was an instance in Roslyn, and it was terrible. I think they were fourth graders. And this is when school was still in session. One of the students, the classmates, was giving Purell to everybody at the playground or at recess. And this child did not give sanitizer to 3 Asian classmates and said, I want everybody to be protected, but you guys, something to the effect of, you already have it, so I'm not giving it to you. So this came home right away, right away, because it hurt the children. And it's hard for them to keep that in. I think when they get to middle school and high school, they're putting on that facade and they want to maybe hide that a little more. So I think we are sometimes a little more fortunate with the young ones because they want to share. And right away, Mama Bear, hunkered down, sat in front, told everybody in the Chinese community, reported it to the Asian American Advisory Council. We started telling them, you need to write to the superintendent. Do you need us to write letters for you? Right away, bam, bam, bam. The next day, we got an email, another text saying, thank you so much. They listened to us and it was addressed immediately. So I feel like the younger ones, sometimes we can get more from them, but it all depends. Every child is different. And if they're not telling you, then you can try to do some role playing. That's what we do sometimes in our house to see what's going on. And things just come out during role play.
Yeah, I guess my point is that, we hear very little from their schools, from their teachers, from their principals. At least that's my personal experience here in Great Neck. So where children don't talk about such serious conversations, but they do. So I'm hoping that with enough of experiences or incidents that's been happening, that we'll hear more education on on that sector.
I was thinking about this before this. I was saying, so what could happen? What needs to happen is what we call a systemic change, where the schools take on as what we call like a zero tolerance. You don't allow anyone to hit. You cannot, the message has to be to the kids, I don't care what's being said at home, you cannot say that here. That is not allowed. So you have to have the ears have to be around the school where the children are. So when it's heard, it's taken care of immediately. And then you have to have it taken care of in other places. Dialogue, maybe in the classroom, maybe assemblies, maybe workshops. But it has to be constantly addressed. Just like you can't hit, you can't fight, you can't do drugs, zero tolerance, right? No drug use, okay, no slurs. That has to be, especially now, where we're at such painful time right now. It's horrible, horrible.
I think what everyone has said in one way or another, and also what some of the audience out there wrote in, is that it's so important to have an environment at home where the lines of communication are open. It's important that children are raised to have pride in their heritage and their background, which all leads to them, feeling confident and also feeling that, home is a respite, but it's also a place that can protect them. And I think those are some of the important elements that would help in almost any situation, Chenzen. But then the adults making a decision when to go outside and who to speak to and how hard to push and what to say. Someone raised the question, are there any books that can, help parents with communication with their younger children? I don't have any, right off the top of my head, but I think it's a good question. I would encourage people to, to do a search, to, go on the internet and to plug in some of the keywords and read some of the reviews. And I'm sure that you can find some books that would be helpful.
If I also may add, I think Kristen was really dead on. I raised 2 children, and I remember I would pick them up from school. I think you do hear a lot in the carpools. And I used to just listen to the conversations between the kids and talk to them about it afterwards. And I remember bringing them home after school, which right now we don't have that regular 9 to 3 or 9 to 2 school hours. But we would come home and there would be snack time, and I would just sit down with them and engage them, ask them how their day was, what happened at school, what was notable and what wasn't. And if they don't talk to you, you tell them a little bit about your day, and it gets them started and they want to share. And they're excited, I think, to tell you if they've done a project and how the project was received and what another project brought back. And you can understand and hear the conversations that are being had in the class, and you can talk to your children. And I think the more you talk to them, the more you're preparing them. And once they're having those conversations through elementary school, they're a lot more knowledgeable as to what they need to do in middle school. I found in middle school was the time that my children did not want to share with me and wanted to be the cool person and really have conversations with their friend and keep it that way. Before middle school, I think they're a lot more open and they want to share with the parents. It's just the parents have to do a little work to get them engaged for them to share. And you could talk to them and give them the guidance that they need.
If I may add to that, Chensing, I think I'm now understanding more of your question. How sometimes when somebody has lice in the classroom, then they send this notification home to all parents. There was a report of lice and, so on and so forth. Please check your child. I think that's something is that something like if some incident happened in class that you as a parent, even though your child didn't share it, you'd like to know, right? It's a nice way of having a teaching moment with your child or understanding what's going on in the classroom. Unfortunately, we don't get those kind of notices when these kind of incidents happen.
Yeah,
but
for example, sorry to interrupt, that you mentioned in the beginning of our today, you said calling chinks. Kids, American, Chinese, they never even heard of this word when they're 5 or 6 years old. They don't know what that word is about. And I've heard, including my kids, that kids will do like this gesture on the school bus. And they will ask me, Mommy, what is this? What does this mean? And this will happen, like they don't even remember when that was, which day that was. So you wouldn't bring this up voluntarily at home either. So you see what I'm experiencing. Or I've heard from many parents as well. So how can they identify that? How can they react to it? How can they protect themselves when they're being called a name that they never even heard before? So
I think what the counteract to that is you help them to take pride in how beautiful they are, what good people they are, all the positive things that they have.
Yeah.
These kids that do that, it's like take the power away from them and you take in the beauty that they have. It's a stroking of who I work with the Latina girls who get beat down all the time. And these young girls I work with, they come in with suicidal ideation. They've been hospitalized. So the work I do with them is about learning to love yourself. Forget all that out there. Who you are beautiful. You are good. Let's find all the good in you. Your children are very lucky. They have you in their life. So you're going to help raise their esteem. You're the counterforce to that negativity. Your connection to positive is what's going to feed that child wonderful things. You have to like help them own that part of it. It's something that you have to give to them as parents.
I would also love it if the teachers just said, there were some words that were inappropriately used in class, and we had a lesson discussing this, and send them a notice to all parents that this is the lesson we talked about in class. I think that would be very helpful, and I don't know why that could not happen, Chenzing. So I think you could be a great advocate for that in the Great Neck school system,
I think by having tonight's seminar, it's a great start in educating both those parents and kids. I believe we have quite a number of children who are listening in tonight and joining their parents, which, undoubtedly to say that these are strong parents and they are, they want to find their tools to protect their children first and protect themselves. So whatever the scenarios that kids experience, we might experience them as well.
Somebody made a comment and asked a question. There was recently a post about finding a bat in Great Neck, the kind that fly around. Someone commented that they should catch the bat and sell it back to China. For those who are apparently biased towards Chinese, what's your suggestion on how we should react? It's hard to imagine that messages like that could be conveyed to their children. And this ties into another comment that was made, which specifically from Great Neck. I recently spoke to a respectable coach, a non-Asian in Great Neck, and he's constantly trying to teach the kids that calling the virus China virus is wrong. The fact that he corrects the kids so often points to the reality that many parents in Great Neck probably harbor these anti-Asian sentiments. So I don't know what the reality is, but certainly we know just broadly that the country is very divided right now. And, those divisions get expressed in many different ways. And many of those are racially along different lines of race. And so this, as somebody said before, is a societal issue, but it trickles down to the local community in the two examples that were just provided about the bat and also the use of that term, China virus. So I do think, just, put that out as an observation. But I do think that if at some point in the future we want to have a session on communicating with younger children, that is, certainly something that we can do. And I do think it's important for kids of any ages, depending on where they're at developmentally, which, reflects how you should speak to them, to make sure that they have facts, to make sure, especially now, that to the extent they can understand it, what is a virus, what is a vaccine, to know that a person's ethnicity or race does not cause them to get sick in some way or to spread some kind of virus. I think there's some basic education for kids that's really important also, so they're not left in the dark to the extent that they can understand. So let's see, I think we have another question coming in. What do you do when you report a racism incident or attack to the police, but the police downplay the severity of the incident to kids being kids? How do we seek justice in order to protect our kids and our neighbors' kids?
So I'll take a stab at this one. I think we need to engage our police to make sure that these incidences are treated with the seriousness that they deserve. I believe sometimes they might not be treated the same way that we would want them to, but it is really important that we keep on reporting them and keep on reporting them, just like it has been said, to as many different places and bring awareness. And as it was mentioned earlier today, to the Office of Asian American in Nassau County. Those data are the data that will help us find ways to deal with this. The data are really important because that's what we base on how to deal with different things that arise in our communities. So I urge everyone to please don't be shy. Don't think this is just maybe one-time incident. Let's hope it is one time. Let's hope as we move forward, we become a lot more united and we understand that we have a lot more in common than our differences. But we need to make sure that we report those and that there is a record of it.
Just to piggyback off Senator Kaplan's remarks, which I completely agree with, I think it is important. I know the director, Farah Mazawala, she's at a roundtable with the commissioner, Nassau County Police Department, almost every other day, asking about all these different questions and what's the protocol here and there. So there was an incident and we brought it to her attention. Maybe we didn't agree with how it was handled or the response, and we're just asking for clarification. We're Asian, we do it respectfully, right? So that's the stereotype that there is, but we do. We're not just gonna let it go, basically. So we've pushed and we will get those kind of answers. So, sometimes you think, oh, it's no use reporting it because they're not gonna do anything anyway. No, that time has long passed. This is this is the time for change. So we will keep pushing. There are so many different channels. There's Senator Kaplan's office. There's Judy Bosworth's office. There's the Office of Asian Affairs. There's Laura Curran's office. We just keep going, all right? And we're not going to stop. Okay?
And the schools and the law enforcement.
Exactly. So the schools are involved.
All have to work together.
We do. So.
Okay, well, I think we're coming to the end of this webinar. And there may be some more questions and maybe there'll be another opportunity to get to them. But I do think that, that the first thing that you have to do when there's an issue that you're deeply concerned about is speak out about it, stand up, bring it to people's attention. And I'm glad that hopefully we were able to do this tonight, up to 140 people at least. And so before I, turn it over to Shenzhen to wish farewell to everyone, I do want to thank everyone on the panel for your experience and insights and your caring. I want to thank all of those of you out there who have stayed with us for almost 90 minutes, and for you to know that this is not the end. If you do want to contact us at North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center, we're at 516-626-1971. Our website is www.northshorechildguidance.org. And we're there. We've been around for 67 years. And if we can help, please feel free to give us a call. So Shenzhen, do you want to end the meeting?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone again for listening tonight, and thank you all the panelists and on the specific topic that's so close to our heart. And once again, today's webinar hopefully will be translated into Mandarin, will be into Chinese, and that many other families could see the language and watch the video playback. And everyone can visit our Great Neck Chinese Association's official website at gnca.org to become a member. And we'll be having many more webinars. And again, thank you for your support. And good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.